Your new wife will not let your son walk. The homeless boy shared her terrible secret. The park was hushed, the late afternoon light slanting through the trees like a benediction. A gentle, deceiving kind of calm. Families were distant, their laughter a faint counterpoint to the rustling leaves. Thomas Whitaker, a man who lived by rules and appearances, pushed his son Daniel's wheelchair. His tailored brown suit felt less like a status symbol and more like a cage. His life was a monument to success, a perfectly constructed facade of order and stability. But it all crumbled when he looked at his son. Daniel, small and silent at 7 years old, sat stiffly in the chair. His pale face was framed by hair the color of sunlight, and his big blue eyes held a quiet sadness that Thomas couldn't bear to name. He hadn't taken a step in nearly a year defined by his new wife's voice, a soft, insistent whisper that Daniel was too fragile, that any attempt to walk could cause him harm. Doctors had offered theories, specialists had run tests, but nothing gave Thomas a concrete reason. So he had listened to his wife, trusting her, believing she knew best. Thomas's first wife and Daniel's mother had died in a car accident 2 years ago. The grief had been a monstrous, suffocating thing. It had swallowed Thomas whole, leaving him a ghost in his own home. Then, a year ago, he met Sarah. She had been a vision of empathy and warmth. She listened to his stories about his late wife, about the emptiness of the house. She held his hand and looked at him with understanding. She seemed like a miracle. And when she turned her attention to Daniel, the boy who had become withdrawn and quiet, she seemed like a savior. He's been through so much, she had told Thomas, stroking Daniel's head. We have to protect him. His body is fragile from the stress. Thomas had clung to her words like a lifeline, so desperate to believe that someone, anyone, knew how to fix the broken parts of his life. So he married her, blinded by his own grief and the promise of a peaceful new life. Then came the boy. He emerged from the shadows of the old oak trees, a ghost in a public park. He was dark-skinned and wiry, no older than Daniel. His orange shirt was torn and stained with what looked like dried blood, and his shorts were far too big. His shoes were mismatched and broken, their soles flapping with every step. Yet, there was a fierce, unyielding light in his dark, burning eyes, a knowledge that seemed too heavy for a child. They locked onto Thomas, a direct and unnerving gaze. You don't know the truth, the boy said, his voice a fragile instrument of raw pain. He pointed a trembling finger at Daniel, at the wheelchair, at Thomas. Your new wife won't let your son walk. The words hit Thomas with the force of a physical blow. The world seemed to stop. The distant laughter, the whisper of the leaves. It all faded into a dull roar in his ears. He looked at Daniel, whose lips parted in a sharp, soundless gasp. Daniel's body seemed to shrink, as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. What did you just say? Thomas's voice was a rough, unfamiliar sound. The man who commanded boardrooms was now reduced to a state of utter disbelief. The boy didn't flinch. His hands balled into fists, his jaw set. She tells him he's weak, he said, his voice rising, carrying not just accusation but the sting of betrayal. She tells him his legs are broken. She lies to you both. She doesn't want him to get better. Daniel's small fingers tightened on the armrests, his knuckles white. Dad, he whispered, his voice trembling, his eyes darting between the strange boy and his father. What does he mean? A cold dread seeped into Thomas's bones. It was the frantic, rational voice in his head telling him to dismiss this. A homeless child, dirty and bruised, making a wild, monstrous accusation. Yet, he couldn't ignore the flicker of recognition in Daniel's eyes, the fear that felt too real to be a coincidence. The boy took a shaky step closer, his small chest heaving. I saw her, he insisted, his voice breaking, when she thought no one was watching. She told your son he could never walk again. And he believed her because she makes him believe her. Thomas's breath hitched. A chilling, horrifying clarity began to creep in. This wasn't some beggar playing a trick. The words were too precise, the pain too genuine. Then Daniel's small, A vulnerable voice broke the silence. Dad, is it true? Am I really not sick? Thomas's carefully constructed world, his marriage, his blind trust, all of it suddenly felt as fragile as glass. He wanted to deny it, to protect his son, but the homeless boy's dark, piercing eyes held him captive. Who are you? Thomas demanded, his hand tightening on the wheelchair's handle. The boy's face hardened, but his eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm the one who knows what she's doing, he said, and I won't let her keep lying. The boy's words echoed in Thomas's mind. Your new wife won't let your son walk. Daniel shifted nervously in the chair. Dad, he's lying, right? Mom wouldn't. She wouldn't do that. But his voice wavered, and Thomas saw it now. The fear in Daniel's eyes wasn't just disbelief, but a dawning, terrible realization. The boy's voice rose again, anger and despair now a torrent. She tells him every day he can't do it. She makes him believe his legs are broken when they're not. I saw her push the wheelchair closer to the window so the neighbors would see, so everyone would think he was helpless. Tears streamed down his dirty cheeks. I saw her grab his shoulders and whisper to him that he'd never walk again, and he believed her because she said it like she loved him. Thomas's mouth went dry. The words were a physical assault, but his mind fought them, desperate to cling to the impossible. How do you know? He forced out, his voice raw. Who are you to say these things about my wife? The boy's thin chest rose and fell, his worn shirt a grim tapestry of old blood. He raised his chin, defiant despite his trembling. Because I lived with her, he said, before you married her. She was my foster mother. Thomas's heart lurched. The boy's words now spilled out like a broken dam. She took me in from the shelter. Everyone thought she was kind, but she wasn't. She only wanted someone to control. She told me I was worthless, that I couldn't learn or run or be like other kids. She kept me hungry sometimes. And when I tried to run away, she hurt me. He gestured to the faint scars on his arm. His voice, though trembling, carried the weight of a painful truth. She doesn't want him to walk because if he walks, people will stop feeling sorry for her. If he walks, she won't be needed. She keeps him small so she can feel big. Thomas staggered back, his knees weak, his stomach in knots. Fragments of memory flooded his mind. The way his wife's voice grew sharp when Daniel tried to stand, how she rushed to stop him, her obsessive protection. Her quiet dismissal of any doctor who suggested therapy. He had thought it was love. Now he saw it for what it was, a twisted form of control. Daniel's small voice, nearly a whisper, cut through the silence. Dad, I can walk. The homeless boy, whose name Thomas still didn't know, nodded, tears running down his face. Yes, he said softly. You just have to believe you can. The silence that followed was unbearable. Thomas knelt beside the chair, his hand shaking. Daniel, he whispered, his throat tight with emotion. You can try. Not for her. For yourself. For us. Daniel's hands trembled as they loosened their grip. His breath came in shallow gasps. Slowly, he pressed his palms against the armrest and pushed himself forward. His legs quivered, as if they had forgotten their purpose. Thomas steadied him, his eyes burning with a desperate hope. The homeless boy stood rigid, his body tense with anticipation. Come on, son, Thomas urged, his voice raw with love and desperation. One step, Daniel's foot lowered to the ground. His knee wobbled, his body shook, but he didn't fall. A gasp escaped his lips. His other foot followed, landing unsteadily but surely. Dad, I'm standing, Daniel whispered in shock. Thomas's chest heaved. Tears blurred his vision as he pulled his son into a fierce embrace, laughter and sobs spilling out at once. The boy in rags stood a few feet away, tears streaking his dirty face, a silent witness to a miracle he had helped create. Thomas released Daniel and turned to the boy, his voice thick with gratitude. You saved him. You saved us. I don't even know your name. The boy hesitated, then spoke softly. Marcus. Thomas nodded, the name a promise. Marcus, you're not going back to the street. Not after this. You're coming home with us. Marcus's lips quivered, his eyes wide, torn between disbelief and a fragile, desperate hope. For the first time in his life, someone had not only heard him but had believed him. As Daniel clung to his father, standing on his own two legs, Thomas knew everything had changed. His wife's secret was shattered, her cruel power broken. The truth had come from the most unlikely of places, from a homeless boy with nothing but courage and scars. Thomas vowed that under the wide-open sky, neither his son nor Marcus would ever be silenced again. The drive home was a blur of silence and emotion. Daniel, no longer in his wheelchair, sat in the back seat, his small hand gripping Marcus's. Marcus, in turn, clutched a new, clean set of clothes Thomas had bought at a store on the way. The car was silent, but the air was thick with unspoken truths. Thomas's mind was a whirlwind of rage and disbelief. He had given his heart to a woman who had poisoned his son's spirit. They arrived at the grand, well-lit hall of his home. The same hall where he had first introduced Sarah to his friends, where she had been the picture of a doting stepmother. The moment they stepped inside, a figure emerged from the shadows. A stunning young woman named Naomi, whose beauty could light up a room. She was wearing a vivid red dress and a gleam of a diamond bracelet on her wrist. Her face held a smirk that did not reach her eyes. She was waiting for them. "There you are," she said, her voice like honeyed ice. "I was getting worried." Her eyes, however, were not on Thomas, but on the two boys. Her smirk tightened when she saw Daniel standing. Her gaze then snapped to Marcus, a flicker of pure rage in her eyes. It was a look of a predator who had just lost its prey. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its sweet facade. "Daniel, you're supposed to be resting. And who is this street urchin?" Thomas took a step forward, his hand on Daniel's shoulder, shielding him. "He has a name, Sarah. His name is Marcus." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, her perfect composure finally cracking. "Marcus? You found him? He's a liar, Thomas. He's a disturbed child who ran away from a perfectly good home." "A home you made a prison," Thomas countered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "He told me everything, Sarah. Everything you did. Everything you told Daniel." A moment of pure terror flashed across her face, replaced instantly by a chilling calm. "He's just trying to extort you, Thomas. Don't believe a word he says. He's a nobody." "He's a brave boy who told the truth," Thomas said, his voice rising. "Something you forgot how to do a long time ago. All this time, I thought you were a loving wife, a caring mother. I thought you were my salvation. But you're just a monster." Her facade crumbled completely, the elegant woman transformed into a furious, cornered animal. "What about you, Thomas? The great Thomas Whitaker, who couldn't handle his own grief. You needed someone to take care of you. I was your rock. I was your savior. You were a parasite," Thomas roared. "You used my grief to poison my son's mind. You used his pain to make yourself feel powerful. You kept him small so you could feel big." The words, Marcus's words, echoed in the hall. Sarah's face was a mask of hatred. Her eyes, filled with an inhuman malevolence, shot from Thomas to Marcus. You ruined everything," she shrieked at the boy. "He saved us," Daniel whispered, his small voice cutting through the rage. "He saved me." Sarah's gaze snapped to Daniel. "I did it for you. I made you safe. I made sure you were the center of attention. Don't you see? I made you mine." Thomas pulled Daniel closer. "You took his ability to be a boy. You took his freedom. You took his hope. And you took mine," she screamed, her voice hoarse now. "You were supposed to be the perfect family, the perfect life. And he ruined it all." She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus, her face contorted with fury. But Thomas was no longer afraid of her. The blind trust was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And don't ever come back. If you ever come near me or my son or Marcus again, I will make sure the whole world knows exactly who you are." Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but they were tears of rage, not of sadness. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking, and stormed out of the hall, slamming the front door behind her with a sound that echoed like a final, broken promise. The silence that followed was a relief. Thomas turned to the boys, his heart aching with a mix of sorrow and overwhelming love. He knelt down, pulling both of them into a tight embrace. Daniel and Marcus, two boys from opposite worlds, were now bound by a shared, painful truth. Over the next few months, their lives were transformed. The wheelchair was moved to the garage, a silent monument to a dark time. Thomas hired a physical therapist, a kind-hearted young man, David, with a face that showed a mix of concern and bewilderment. David was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, standing in a grand, well-lit hall. He was a professional, but he looked at Daniel with genuine warmth. "There is no medical reason why Daniel can't walk," David explained to Thomas. "It's a psychological block. He has to unlearn the fear he's been taught." Every day, David worked with Daniel. First, it was just standing. Then, it was taking a step. Then, 2 steps. Thomas watched with tears in his eyes as Daniel, with Marcus cheering him on, slowly, painfully, began to reclaim his legs. Marcus, meanwhile, blossomed. Thomas enrolled him in school. He bought him new clothes, new shoes, and a backpack filled with notebooks. The first time Thomas saw him in a crisp white shirt, his face scrubbed clean, his scars still visible but fading, he saw not a homeless boy, but a son. Marcus's intelligence and fierce spirit, once used to survive the streets, were now applied to learning. He devoured books, excelled in his classes, and for the first time in his life, felt safe. One evening, Thomas found Marcus sitting on the floor of Daniel's room. A storybook opened between them. Marcus was pointing at the words, teaching Daniel to read. Daniel was no longer quiet. He was filled with a bright, hopeful energy. "He's teaching me all the words," Daniel said, a wide smile on his face. Thomas's heart swelled. These 2 boys, who should have been strangers, had become brothers. The old wound of his first wife's death still ached, but it no longer defined his life. Thomas had learned a new kind of love, a love that was not about desperation or a need to be saved, but about giving and protecting and building a future. He remembered the day he saw Sarah for the first time after their confrontation. He was in the grocery store. She was walking with a highly ultra-realistic 3D rendering of a 60-year-old man, Henry Aduale, with a lean frame and a dark, dignified face etched with deep lines. He was wearing a faded navy uniform and a cap that sits low on his forehead. His weathered hands are calloused. She was holding onto his arm, her expression a mask of doting concern. He could see it now, the same smile she had used on him, the same way she had used her beauty to reel him in. He had a sudden flash of insight, a cold dread that this man was her next victim. But Thomas knew he could do nothing. He had saved himself and his family, but he could not save the world from her. He walked away, a sense of finality settling in his heart. He had done his part. He had broken her cycle of control in his own life. Back at home, he saw Daniel and Marcus running in the backyard, chasing a ball, their laughter filling the air. Thomas stood by the window, watching them, his eyes full of tears. They were not tears of sadness or regret, but of gratitude. He had lost a wife, but he had found something so much more important: a family, a purpose, and a truth he would never have found on his own. He thought back to that day in the park, to the boy in rags who had had the courage to tell a truth no one else would. He had saved Daniel, but he had also saved Thomas. He had given him back his son, and in the process had shown him the true meaning of love, family, and courage. The sun set, casting a golden glow over the backyard. Daniel, no longer a boy confined to a chair, and Marcus, no longer a boy confined to the streets, ran together free. And Thomas, the man who had sought perfection, found peace in the beautiful, messy, and perfectly imperfect reality of his new life. If you enjoyed this story of courage, truth, and found family, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more emotional and dramatic tales. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.